An elite recruit from the class of 2026 in the state of Utah has chosen BYU, and he's not the first to do so. So, why is Utah struggling to land four-star talent in the state of Utah as of late? We're going to break it down on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen and view of the day. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. If it's your first time listening to this show, make sure you like and subscribe. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. You can take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. Excited to be joined on today's show by ESPN 700's Porter Larson to talk all things recruiting, because there are some weird recruiting trends that have been going on for a little bit, and this is the latest. We'll talk about why Utah hasn't landed a four-star recruit out of high school in a long time, but first we've got to start with another disappointing trend, and that's Bot Mulitalo, the four-star offensive lineman who was a defensive end committed to Oregon, then entered the portal as an offensive lineman, and ends up at BYU. Becomes the latest player from the state of Utah, too, as a four-star recruiter, just a high-level recruit, to choose the Cougars. I mean, you get guys like Mulitalo now. They have two of the top three players in the class of 2026, which is a massive class because four of those guys were ranked inside the top 100. Only one of them is still available. That's Muala, and we don't know where it says he's going to end up at. But two guys going to BYU like that, and there's a few other ones we can talk about in a moment. But Porter, I do think it's a concerning trend that as of late, a lot of the top in-state talent is gone to BYU over Utah.
Yeah, man. Well, it's always interesting when you look at the top talent in Utah, right? You usually have number one, and that's a guy that like goes to LSU or USC or something of the like.
Yeah, Jerome Miles last year.
Oregon, right? There's kind of a regularity of that happening. And then BYU and Utah, for the most part, duke it out for 2 through 10, right? Now, there are instances where one of the guys will be a legacy kid. The top recruit in the state will come to Utah. But you have to win a good share of those battles if you want to, I guess, remain on top here in Utah. You're not going to get by without recruiting in your state at an elite level. So, if you can land 2 or 3 of those top 10 guys every year, that's, I think, should be the baseline. And for Utah, usually you're around that area. I think Cyrus Polu in this next class, I don't know if he's a 4-star, but he's right on the edge.
He was right on the edge, you're right.
And, that's one of the top players. I know Carson Kafusi was a top 10 player. So you had 2 of the top 10 players in last year's class. You'd like a little bit more, but I don't think it's anything that is majorly concerning. I think, JT, it's a trend that you absolutely have to reverse. You absolutely want to make dividends there, but it's also cyclical. It's also cyclical to the point where the folks who thought that Utah was going to have complete superiority in recruiting over BYU for the next 100 years, well, you were wrong anyway. The folks who thought that BYU was going to be down and out for the next 40 years, you were wrong anyway, right? College football is cyclical. Recruiting classes are more so cyclical than anything else in the sport. Yes. And, it is concerning. It's something you have to reverse. But I also think it's just following the trend of Utah having a couple of really tough years. Winning and exposure does matter in recruiting as well. And BYU's had a great 4 or 5 year run, right? And I think that the natural thing that you see with that is a little bump in recruiting, a little valley in recruiting. But I don't see any like long-term huge trends that make me feel worried or concerned that Utah has like lost the state. I still think that it's very healthy. That battle, whether you want to talk about the rivalry on a fandom level, talk about the rivalry on a recruiting level, on the field, in the locker rooms, on the staffs, it's at a healthy spot. And I don't know that Utah's necessarily in a long-term concern standpoint. Now, post Kyle Whittingham, maybe an adjustment on how you gauge that, how you look at it, because then you kind of have to just kind of reset how you look and how you assess Utah's recruiting.
Yeah, I think you're right on the field, especially that the competitiveness will continue to be back and forth. But it's just unfortunate that you have the likes of a Brock Harris, a tight end I really like, and he's going to BYU. Mulitalo, an offensive lineman at the end, I really like at Lone Peak. He's going to BYU. Hunter Clegg was really fired up about him coming off his mission. He's going to BYU. Tasilia Kana, top recruit from a couple years ago, he's going to BYU. Nusi Tamu-Peau, another one. He decommits from Stanford. He goes to BYU. We mentioned Cyrus Polu. That was in June of last year. So that's what does concern me, is just how long it's been since Utah's landed a 4-star, all the top players going to BYU. But I do think it says two things. Number one, I do feel like Utah has made definitely a heavier push towards the transfer portal. They've prioritized a lot of their additions there. But the one area that I do think is concerning in all this, Porter, is so far BYU has shown that NIL-wise, now, granted, it's more for basketball than it has been for football so far, although we know what a whirlwind the whole Tanu Vasa situation was. We know BYU's NIL, at least for some of their sports, is vastly superior to what Utah can do. So in an era where there is a lot of pay-for-play going on, I'm not saying that's what BYU is doing, but I'm just saying there is a lot of active movement with players because of NIL compensation reasons. The fact that we know BYU has a lot of NIL and they're landing a lot of these top guys is definitely something that concerns me as we move more and more into this NIL era.
Well, and it's not a coincidence. There's a lot of folks who, want to push back on the fact that BYU is going out and putting money down and getting these players. They are. Everyone is. That is the game. It is college football in 2025. Until the NCAA has some teeth and can enforce anything, even the rules that they put down aren't going to really be followed to a T, right? There's always going to be a team that's willing to push it a little bit to gain a competitive edge. And, for BYU, the fact that your boosters are coming to the table and making things happen, you shouldn't push back on that. You should be stoked about that. Mm-hmm. A little ahead of Utah, as you mentioned, more so on the basketball side. But I think it has more to do on the football side with, like you said, Utah's emphasis on the transfer portal. They had to go in that direction this year because of the production that they lost and because of not only the production they lost, but the turnover in the offensive rooms, right? You have a new offensive coordinator there, having some players from the portal that he's comfortable with, that he's coached with, that have been in his offense. That's valuable. So, you don't get the in-state recruiting bump from a guy that just played a college year in New Mexico, but it's still a really good recruiting win that has some other context with it, right? And like I said, these cycles will turn the other way. It's a couple years ago, we were just talking about the Fano brothers and them going both to Utah. And right, this is something that we'll continue to do. 8 years ago, it was Julian Blackman and all of his class that were all the top players in the state, Lucky Fotu and the like, right? The cycles will go back and forth, but the teams that are most suited, both in the NIL space, in the transfer portal space, those teams are going to come out on top more times than not. And it's a trend that Utah has to pay some attention to.
That's what concerns me, as you mentioned, the NIL part. In the years past, I would have been like, it's a swing pendulum, and it'll go back in Utah's direction eventually. Right. I'm curious to see, 10 years from now, what recruiting rankings look like. But I will once again also say, Utah has such good development system. I don't think Utah is ever going to not be able to compete with BYU. I think they'll always be there. I just do think it's just right now not great that a lot of these top guys are picking BYU. So the question then becomes, okay, so why is Utah struggling to land 4-star recruits right now? That's what we're going to be talking about in one moment. But first, today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you just stop managing your money and you start building wealth. There's also that surprising insight. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save even more. Also, that all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. It's also that easy collaboration. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track, share personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege, all caps, no spaces, at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code locked on, college, all caps, no spaces, for half off your first year at Monarch Money today. Porter Larson back with me here, and we were talking about why is Utah struggling to land four-star recruits? Because Utah got some big commitments in Cyrus Polu, Kristen Thatcher last year, and in the summers when you do see a lot of movement. But there are those late commits in December, and there's those transfer portal guys. Like I wish I would have loved to have done the episodes where instead of saying, oh, it's a miss for Utah because those guys went to BYU, those players ended up coming to Utah. So there have been elite players available. Utah just hasn't been able to land. But I do think it's concerning that Utah hasn't landed a four-star in nearly a year, but they have focused heavily on the portal. Devin Dampier is absolutely a guy I look at and I go, hey, that's a four-star portal talent, just a veteran rather than a recruit. And that is something that does get me excited too, is that Utah is still bringing impact guys. This is a team that's right there. Last year, so many of the games they lost were due to poor quarterback play and other offensive issues they had. Devin Dampier, Jason Beck instantly raised the offensive ceiling. It's a Utah defense that it returns a lot of key guys still. I think Utah is okay, but I do think I wish they had landed at least a couple more of these guys, and it'll be interesting to see the type of summer this team has.
Yeah, I would say it's not anything that concerns you this year, right? Because you're not necessarily looking at a high school four-star recruit as someone you want to rely upon in 2025. Devin Dampier, Creed Whitmore, Wayshawn Parker, these guys, Jackson Jones, Blake Cotton, these guys are all like very borderline. If they were high school players, they'd probably be four-star recruits.
Yeah.
But you're getting them, and the theory is that they're ready, right? A lot of these guys have played college ball before. So you're getting what equates to a four-star recruit, and you're getting him with some Division I experience or with some FCS experience. And I think that Utah leaning into that is something that you're going to continue to see, because in the NIL era, JT, those 4- and 5-star recruits, they're getting offered checks right out of high school now. That's not something Utah had to contend with 5 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, right? So the 4-star high school recruit that was already tough to get for Utah, some California kid playing quarterback, right? That kid is now fielding offers from schools at the D1 level, yes, but also schools like Sacramento State, who are upping their NIL game, upping their, their ability to go out and get players in their own state. So the entire approach to recruiting, the entire approach to like which kind of players you're going to go get has shifted. And I think that Utah's has shifted towards a little bit more guys that can help us now, mm-hmm. and a little bit less of the development that we're used to seeing. And I don't know that you're going to see that change, especially while Kyle Whittingham's still here, because they want to win now. This is not something where Kyle is looking 5 years into the future, 4 years into the future at what this kid can be when he's a senior. He's thinking about 2025 and winning. He's thinking about 2026 maybe. And that's probably the focus, the angle on recruiting that you should probably expect. Now, they're going to try to go land that in-state recruit, that highly touted 4-star kid, but I don't know that you're going to see as much success with it. And for that reason, you may see a little bit less focus on it for Utah.
Yeah, this is a Utah team that it brings in veterans, and it's an interesting combination now that Utah has, where you got to bring in the transfer portal additions, but then recruit and develop, because you don't want to become totally portal reliant, as we've seen. Yes, sometimes Indiana flipped their roster around right away and won big, right. But then you have Florida State last year, where what a disaster, because they went just really on transfer guys, and it totally ended up failing too. So I do think it's interesting. The other thing that's just a bummer right now is what you mentioned too. You contend with right away NIL money out of high school for these guys. I mean, USC has really come in as of late and gotten a lot of these guys to come over to the state. I know Jerome Miles eventually ended up at A&M, but originally he was the guy who went to USC. Aaron Dunn last year to USC. Utah's top wide receiver in the portal. Zacharias Williams now at USC too. So you have to compete with the Big $10 as well too. And yeah, it's something that Utah's going to be able to land some talent, but It's just unfortunate that you are competing with the NIL checks right away now for high school recruits as well, even. So it does make it even harder to retain the best in-state talent.
It does, but it gives you opportunity too, right? This chaos can kind of be a ladder in other ways, right? I think there really is a window for, maybe you aren't able to talk as many 18-year-old kids to visiting Salt Lake and coming to your school, but you have players like a Devin Dampier, a Wayshawn Parker, who they kind of know the game a little bit more, right? A $5,000 NIL check or some deal with a local company isn't going to sway them as much as it would a kid who's never seen that before, right? And Utah will use that to their advantage. And if it works in 2025, they can continue to, because they can build on the successes that they can now show on paper. So, I think that the entire approach to recruiting is going to have to be something you're used to shifting. And then the second Kyle Whittingham retires, you're going to have to get ready to shift again.
Yeah, Utah did land a high recruit, Thaddeus Thatcher, in the class of 2027. But just speaking of the changes in this, Wyatt Becker is a guy that Utah had landed in 23. We're really excited about Wyatt Becker, and the offense ends up changing, and now he has ended up making his way into the portal. So that's another situation there where you're like, okay, you get a recruit. It's harder to retain guys now more than ever. But the one thing that does really have me excited about the future of Utah football is how good Utah's developmental system has been, the history of it, bringing in their types of players. And even though when they end up swapping positions with them, Hunter Andrews is a tight end now. They put Teo Johnson at safety after he's a wide receiver. Just Utah has a really good history of maximizing the value they get on. And I look even in the 2025 class. Yes, it's light on 4-star talent. There are a lot of guys in this class that I really like. And I do think when you pair their character and work ethic with the coaching that Utah has, as well as just the development that happens when guys are growing up, I still think this Utah team is going to be right in the thick of it in the Big 12 for years to come, even if they don't land the 4-star talent, because they weren't always landing the best recruits either. And they found a way to beat USC and Oregon a few years ago.
Yeah, there's no rule saying that Utah can't do what they've done in the past, even though it's a different era of college football, right? You can still punch above your weight. You can still develop better than the school next to you. I do think that the specifics have changed, right? When it comes to funding, when it comes to the rat race there, but football, man. Football is pretty simple when you really break it down to the nuts and bolts of it. If you can run the damn ball, if you can defend and have like a balanced offense, you can develop players into fitting those roles, fitting those schemes, and there's no reason to believe Utah can't continue to do that. I do like this class. I like, as you mentioned, the storylines we don't know yet because of the production or the development rather that we're going to see from some of these kids that were, as you mentioned, not 4-star recruits. They're 2-3-star recruits, but still quite a bit of promise. And we can say it 1,000 times. Eric Weddle was a 2-star recruit.
Yeah. Devin Lloyd, right? Brant Keithy.
Utah has made their hay doing exactly what we're talking about right now. So while the recruiting trends are something that we have to talk about and Utah does want to reverse, it's not the end of the world. For Utah to go from a top 30 to 35 recruiting team to, because of NIL, maybe 35 to 40, I think that's something that they can still manage. And like I said, there are still opportunities to win in the NIL space while still holding on to what I think are traditional values here.
Yeah, and this is still a program. Morgan Scalley, Kyle Whittingham. I still believe Utah is going to be in the thick of it for the conference. But we mentioned a lot the NIL era, and something interesting happened at Utah that, look, it's hard not to ignore just how college sports is changing, the revenue sharing and everything going on. And when you see moves like this, not wonder, hey, what's going on here? So Utah announced that they're going to be stopping their beach volleyball program after this season. And there have been a lot of ramblings and reports, not about Utah, but just in college athletics in general. How will some of the Olympic sports get affected by the desire and just not desire, the need you have to fund your top programs too. Based on the statement that Mark Harlan put out, they are not saying that is at all what the reason is. They're just saying, hey, there's only a few teams that offer beach volleyball at this high of a level right now. And he just talks about it there, like not feeling like it's in the university's best interest. But Porter, I do wonder in the NIL era, as more teams and everyone is always saying they need more money, I hate the idea that this could happen with other Utah athletics programs, but I don't know if we can rule it out in today's era, and that's a scary thing.
Yeah, well, it's important to kind of add the context to this, where, as Mark and the university alluded to, there aren't a lot of schools that do this, right? Mm-hmm. There aren't a lot of competitive beach volleyball teams, and now that you've gone from the Pac-12 to the Big 12, it makes it even harder to try to remain affiliated with the teams that do play beach volleyball. It complicates the travel schedules. It does all sorts of things. Included in the interest of the university that Mark was talking about is, even if they can't really say it, is money. It's NIL. It's priorities, really, right? So when you want to move into more of a pro model, you're going to see things like this, where a sport that was for a long time somewhat subsidized by other sports, and that's the case with the majority of college athletics, JT. I don't think a lot of people understand that there are only a couple of revenue sports for almost every university in the country. It's football and basketball. Now, at Utah, we're in a unique position where gymnastics also makes a revenue. I believe the women's basketball team has broken into the green before. That's cool. But at the end of the day, it's not the norm, right? So when you move into a space where you're now having to approach things at more of a professional level, more of a business level, unfortunately, your perspective or your priorities change. The interest that your university can put into certain things, it narrows, right? And that's what we're seeing here. You're going to see more attention, more money, more focus, more branding, more PR towards basketball, towards football, towards the NIL space, towards the business, the money-making elements of the university. And that's just a natural transition into the direction the sport is moving. There's still some things to be learned with the NCAA and with, frankly, federal court.
Yeah,
before we can like really know what it all looks like. But Utah is far from the only university and far from the last university that will be making cuts like this, because there's just no way you can explain or justify, especially when you have to use that money to make your rosters better to even keep these sports existing. There's just not very many ways you can justify subsidizing more sports, branching out to sports that aren't popular in your region. And unfortunately, that's just a reality of it. And I think it has everything to do with the Pac-12 move, with the advancement of the very fast advancement of where college sports are going. And yeah, a little bit of NIL and money is involved as well, even if the university can't necessarily say that because of the place they've been put in by the NCAA.
Yeah, it absolutely feels that way. So hate to see what's happening with the beach volleyball program. And we mentioned too, there's a lot of other factors that go into this outside of the NIL, the lack of beach volleyball teams, not in the Pac-12 anymore. So there are other factors too, but it's hard to ignore when there is so much noise going on around college sports in general about other programs having to do this and other programs having already done it too. Like there are several other athletic programs in recent years that have had to cut some of their other ones. And it feels like that is to be shaping up for the NIL resources and having enough money for the revenue sharing and all the things there. But one thing we know Utah is going to continue to do is invest in their football program. Porter, I've talked a little bit about Utah's NFL draft week. I was still shocked that Junior Tafuna Karene Reed went undrafted. Only one guy ends up going there. It's Caleb Lohner, and I'm really excited for him because of the intangibles, but glad to see most of the Utes land undrafted free agents, a couple other ones that I've been surprised by. What did you make of 2025's NFL draft as it relates to Utah football?
As you mentioned, quieter than usual. Usually the NFL draft space for this station and for me particularly has always been really busy. This year was a little more quiet, but as you mentioned, Caleb Lohner, the one guy that gets picked during the draft, he won't be the only guy that's on a roster next year from this class at Utah. I can almost guarantee you that.
Yes.
Like you said, I was really surprised that Junior Tafuna wasn't drafted.
Had a great Senior Bowl.
That's the main part, is that when you go and you perform at the Senior Bowl and you have that many people tweeting about you, Jim Nagy, right? Guys that are in NFL scouting circles, usually that gets enough folks to now go watch your tape.
Yeah.
That they know what they're dealing with. The problem with playing defensive tackle at Utah is that your tape is really hard to dissect because the assignments that you draw as a Junior Tafuna, while yes, you had moments that Utah fans all remember where you're wreaking havoc in the backfield, that's not really what you're asked to do a lot of the time. You're asked to stand up the guy across from you, kind of clean things up for your linebackers and slow things down. John Penasini, Leki Fotu, these are guys who had plenty of time in the NFL, fruitful careers, but didn't necessarily get drafted as high as you would have expected because of that same reason, where you play D-tackle at Utah and you're not asked to just go cause havoc in the backfield. There's a little more responsibility to it than that. There's a little more patience to it than that. And for that reason, you don't see a lot of the high draft picks for guys like Leki. If you just look at Leki Fotu's measurables, his combine numbers, and just what he does on the field, man, that guy feels like a second-round pick, a first-round pick, right? So you kind of saw a little bit of the struggle there with Junior. I think he's going to go and have no issues making a roster, but he's the one that I actually would have bet the most money on getting drafted.
Agreed.
Over the weekend, and yeah, he didn't. The rest of the guys, though, I think found pretty good spots, right? Mekhi Bernard to Tennessee, Dorian Singer with Vegas, Maya Vaughn to Minnesota. I'm trying to think. Karenni Reed to Denver, Connor O'Toole to Seattle, and not just on an undrafted free agent deal. They, before all this was put together, they guaranteed him money. So awesome stuff for Connor O'Toole. I'm trying to think of any other guys from Utah. I think that's it for them.
I think it's the main ones.
Jaquin and Jackson going to Jacksonville.
JT Broughton got something too.
Oh, that's right. JT Broughton as well. So yeah, it's cool to see, man. A lot of former Utes that are
Dorian Singer
at least going to have a chance. Yeah, Dorian in Las Vegas as well. So they'll have a shot. I'm not totally surprised that they didn't get drafted. I kind of was expecting a lot of undrafted free agent stuff to roll down. The one big surprise, I think, for me was Junior Tafuna, and then Brant Kuithe.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
We haven't heard anything on Brant Kuithe, and that has far more to do with his medicals, his age, the fact that we haven't seen him play football in 2 years. Has all to do with that and not to do with his actual ability, because we know what he can do when he's on the field.
Yeah, he's a special talent, and hope that he does get that opportunity and can stay healthy, because, man, I still remember the Tyler Huntley days, and I know it was a long time ago, but in some of the Camerizing games, there's Brant Kuithe is a heck of a football player. We'll see what ends up happening with him and the rest of these guys, but going to be fascinating to watch, see how it all ends up shaking out. Porter, always appreciate you making the time to come on. Please let everyone know where they can find you at.
Yeah, man, obviously daily ESPN 700, 2 o'clock, me and Spence chopping it up, and then you got the Twitter handle down there, ESPN700sports.com. I'm always covering sports or up to no good. So appreciate you having me, man.
Porter, you're the best. Thanks again, man. Have a good one.
Thanks, JT.
That's going to do it for today's Locked On Utes. We'll be back with you again tomorrow, talk about the latest in Utah football, Utah recruiting, and Utah athletics as a whole.
Cool.